When rescuers found her 3 days later, barely conscious and clinging to a rocky ledge at 12,000 feet, Maya Chen's first words weren't about her own survival. "Did you find Sarah?" she whispered through cracked lips, her small frame trembling against the mountain wind. What happened in those 72 hours would redefine everything the climbing community thought they knew about courage, friendship, and the extraordinary strength that can emerge from the most unlikely heroes. Maya Chen had always been the smallest person in any room she entered. At barely 5 feet tall and weighing 98 pounds soaking wet, she had spent her 26 years proving that size meant absolutely nothing when it came to determination. Her friends often joked that she was like a hummingbird, tiny but fierce, always moving with purpose and intensity that commanded respect. The morning of September 15th started like any other climbing expedition Maya had been on. She stood at the base of Mount Precipice, a notorious peak in the Rocky Mountains known for claiming more lives than any other mountain in the region. The statistics were sobering. 1 in every 12 climbers who attempted the summit never made it back down. But Maya wasn't thinking about statistics as she adjusted her gear and checked her ropes for the 5th time. She was thinking about Sarah. Sarah Martinez had been Maya's climbing partner for 3 years, ever since they met at a rock climbing gym in Denver. Where Maya was methodical and careful, Sarah was bold and spontaneous. Where Maya studied every route for hours before attempting it, Sarah would glance at the rock face and start climbing with an infectious confidence that made everyone around her believe anything was possible. Their friendship had been forged on countless cliff faces and mountain trails, built on trust that ran deeper than family bonds. When you're hanging from a rope 200 feet above the ground, you learn to trust your partner with more than just your life. You trust them with your dreams, your fears, your absolute faith that they'll never let you fall. Sarah had been planning this climb for months. Mount Precipice had been her white whale, the one peak that had defeated her twice before. The first time, a sudden storm had forced her team to retreat just 500 feet from the summit. The second time, a rockfall had injured another climber, and Sarah had volunteered to help with the rescue, sacrificing her own summit attempt. "Third time's the charm," Sarah had said over coffee 3 weeks earlier, spreading out topographical maps across Maya's kitchen table. Her dark eyes sparkled with the familiar fire that Maya had come to associate with Sarah's most ambitious plans. "I can feel it this time, Maya. This is our mountain." Maya had studied the maps with the intensity of a scholar preparing for final exams. Mount Precipice was a technical climb, requiring advanced skills in rock climbing, ice climbing, and high-altitude mountaineering. The mountain's reputation wasn't built on height alone. At 14,200 feet, it wasn't even the tallest peak in the region. Its danger came from unpredictable weather, loose rock, and a series of technical sections that had earned names like the Widowmaker and Satan's Staircase. But Maya trusted Sarah's judgment implicitly. If Sarah believed they were ready, then they were ready. Maya had spent the weeks before the climb training with an intensity that worried her friends. She ran 10 miles every morning before work, spent her evenings at the climbing gym, and filled her weekends with practice climbs on increasingly difficult routes. Her coworkers at the engineering firm where she worked as a structural analyst had grown accustomed to finding Maya studying climbing routes during her lunch breaks. They knew better than to suggest she was too small or too fragile for such dangerous pursuits. Maya had once climbed the exterior of their office building during a company team-building event, scaling 12 stories in record time while her colleagues cheered from the ground. The morning they set out for Mount Precipice, Maya felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that preceded every major climb. She had packed and repacked her gear 3 times, checking and double-checking every carabiner, rope, and piece of protection. Her backpack contained enough supplies for 5 days, even though they planned to complete the climb in 3. Sarah arrived at Maya's apartment at 4 in the morning, her pickup truck loaded with gear and her face glowing with anticipation. She bounced on her toes as Maya performed her final gear check, her energy infectious even in the pre-dawn darkness. "You ready for this, tiny dancer?" Sarah asked, using the nickname she had given Maya after watching her navigate a particularly delicate climbing sequence with ballet-like grace. "Ready as I'll ever be," Maya replied, shouldering her pack and feeling the familiar weight settle against her back. Despite its bulk, the pack felt comfortable. She had trained with it for months, taking long hikes through mountain trails to build up her strength and endurance. The drive to the trailhead took 2 hours through winding mountain roads. Sarah drove while Maya navigated, the two of them falling into the easy conversation that marked all their adventures together. They talked about work, relationships, dreams for the future, and the technical aspects of the climb ahead. Mount Precipice loomed larger as they approached, its summit shrouded in clouds that Maya hoped would clear by the time they reached the technical sections. The mountain's dark granite faces caught the early morning sunlight, creating patterns of light and shadow that made the rock appear to move and shift. At the trailhead, they met their third team member, James Rodriguez, an experienced guide whom Sarah had climbed with before. James was a weathered man in his 40s, with the lean build and steady gaze of someone who had spent his life in the mountains. He greeted Maya with professional courtesy, though she could see the slight concern in his eyes as he took in her small stature. "Maya's stronger than she looks," Sarah said, noticing James's expression. "She's never failed to reach a summit she's attempted." This was true, though Maya's climbing resume was considerably shorter than her partner's. She had been climbing seriously for only 4 years, but her engineering background gave her a unique approach to route finding and risk assessment. She understood load distribution, stress points, and structural integrity in ways that made her an exceptionally safe climber. The first day of the climb passed without incident. They hiked 8 miles through dense forest, gaining 3,000 feet in elevation, before setting up their first camp in a meadow dotted with wildflowers. Maya felt strong and confident, her small frame moving efficiently up the trail while her larger pack seemed to disappear into the rhythm of her stride. That evening, as they sat around their camp stove sharing a meal of dehydrated pasta, James shared stories of previous climbs on Mount Precipice. He spoke with the measured tone of someone who had learned to respect the mountain's dangers without being paralyzed by them. "The key is weather," he explained, gesturing toward the peak above them. "This mountain creates its own weather systems. Storms can appear out of nowhere, and when they do, you have minutes to find shelter or get off the exposed sections." Maya listened intently, filing away every detail. Sarah, meanwhile, studied their route map by headlamp, tracing the path they would take over the next 2 days. Her excitement was palpable, but Maya could see the focus beneath it. Sarah might be spontaneous in many things, but she never took safety lightly when it came to serious climbs. The second day brought them into the alpine zone, where trees gave way to rocky terrain and thin air. Maya felt the altitude immediately. Her heart rate increased with less exertion, and she found herself breathing more deeply than usual. But her body adapted quickly, drawing on months of training and several previous high-altitude climbs. They moved as a rope team now, connected by a dynamic climbing rope that would catch any falls and allow them to assist each other through difficult sections. Maya climbed in the middle, with James leading and Sarah bringing up the rear. This positioning allowed James to scout the route ahead, while Sarah, with her keen eye for alternative paths, could suggest variations if the primary route proved problematic. The climbing became more technical as they gained elevation. What had started as a hiking trail evolved into scrambling over boulders, then into actual rock climbing, where they needed to use their hands as much as their feet. Maya found herself in her element here. Her small size allowed her to fit through gaps that challenged larger climbers, and her light weight meant less stress on marginal holds. By late afternoon, they had reached their second camp at 11,500 feet, positioned on a narrow ledge with spectacular views of the surrounding peaks. Maya set up her sleeping system with mechanical precision, creating a comfortable space in the minimal area available. The temperature was dropping rapidly as the sun disappeared behind the mountain's western ridge. As they prepared dinner, James pointed out the route they would take the next day. The final push to the summit would begin before dawn, requiring them to navigate the mountain's most technical sections in the early morning, when conditions were typically most stable. "The crux is about 500 feet below the summit," he explained, indicating a section of rock that appeared nearly vertical from their vantage point. "It's only about 60 feet of climbing, but it's exposed and technical. After that, it's a straightforward scramble to the top." Maya studied the route through binoculars, memorizing every detail she could see. The rock looked solid, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving. She had learned to never trust a hold until she had tested it personally. That night, she slept fitfully in her lightweight sleeping bag, her dreams filled with images of the climbing ahead. She woke several times to the sound of wind building around their exposed camp, but each time the gusts died down before becoming truly concerning. At 3 in the morning, James's alarm broke the mountain silence. They dressed quickly in the cold air, their breath visible in small clouds as they prepared their gear by headlamp. Maya felt the familiar pre-climb nervousness, but it was overwhelmed by excitement. After months of planning and preparation, summit day had finally arrived. The early morning air was crisp and still as they began climbing by headlamp. Maya moved carefully but confidently, her body warmed by the physical exertion despite the freezing temperature. The rock was solid, providing good holds and reliable protection placements for their safety equipment. As dawn broke over the surrounding peaks, Maya found herself climbing some of the most spectacular rock she had ever encountered. The granite was clean and featured, offering a perfect balance of challenge and security. Her engineering mind appreciated the rock's structural integrity, while her climber's heart soared at the beauty of the movement. They made excellent progress through the morning, moving efficiently as a team through increasingly complex terrain. Maya's months of training showed in her fluid movement and steady breathing. She felt strong and confident, completely in tune with her partners and the mountain around her. It was just after 10 in the morning when they reached the base of the crux section James had pointed out the evening before. Looking up at the 60 feet of technical climbing that stood between them and the summit, Maya felt a thrill of anticipation. This was what they had come for, the moment when months of preparation would either prove sufficient or fall short. Sarah moved into the lead position, her excitement barely contained as she studied the route ahead. Maya could see the joy in her partner's movements as she prepared for the final technical challenge. After 2 previous failures, Sarah was finally within reach of her goal. "En belay," Maya called out, confirming that she was ready to provide safety support through the rope system. "Climbing," Sarah replied, beginning her ascent of the final obstacle between their team and the summit of Mount Precipice. Maya watched her partner move up the rock face with fluid grace, each movement deliberate and controlled. Sarah had always been a beautiful climber to watch, but on this morning she seemed to float up the stone as if gravity had less hold on her than usual. 20 feet up, Sarah paused to place a piece of protection, a metal device that would catch the rope if she fell. Maya felt the familiar tension of the safety system as Sarah clipped the rope through the protection and continued climbing. 30 feet up, Sarah encountered the technical crux of the route, a section where the holds became smaller and the angles steeper. Maya watched intently, ready to provide encouragement or assistance through the rope if needed, but Sarah moved through the difficult section with confidence, her years of experience evident in every placement of hand and foot. 40 feet up, Sarah paused again, this time for longer. Maya could see her partner studying the rock above, working out the sequence of moves that would take her through the final section. The summit was visible now, less than 20 feet above Sarah's position. It was then that Maya heard the sound that would change everything, a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding rock faces like a gunshot. Looking up, she saw Sarah's eyes widen in alarm as the hold she was gripping shifted under her weight. Maya watched in horror as a section of rock the size of a refrigerator broke away from the mountain face, carrying Sarah with it as it tumbled toward the valley below. Time seemed to slow as Maya watched her best friend disappear over the edge of the cliff, swept away by the massive rockfall. The safety rope connecting them went taut with a violent jerk that nearly pulled Maya from her own stance. Only her anchor point, a solid piece of protection she had placed moments earlier, kept her from being dragged over the edge as well. The mountain fell silent except for the distant echo of falling rocks bouncing off lower cliff faces. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed what had just happened. Sarah was gone. The rope connecting them stretched taut over the edge, disappearing into the void where her climbing partner had fallen. "Sarah!" Maya screamed, her voice cracking with panic and desperation. There was no response except the echo of her own voice bouncing off the granite walls around her. James, who had been positioned above the crux section preparing to assist with the final moves to the summit, rappelled down to Maya's position with practiced efficiency. His face was pale beneath his climbing helmet, but his voice remained steady and professional. "We need to get down there," he said, already beginning to set up a rappel system. "The rope is still under tension, which means she's not in free fall anymore. She could be alive." Maya looked over the edge where Sarah had disappeared. The cliff face dropped away at a steep angle for about 100 feet before hitting a ledge system that was barely visible from their position. Beyond that, the mountain fell away into a deep valley thousands of feet below. "How do we get down there?" Maya asked, her engineering mind already working on the technical problems even as her heart broke with worry for her friend. James was assembling their longest ropes, connecting them together to create a system that would allow them to descend to the ledge system where Sarah might have landed. "It's going to be a complex rappel," he said grimly. "Maybe 150 feet straight down, and we won't know what we're rappelling into until we're committed." Maya nodded, forcing herself to focus on the technical aspects of the rescue rather than the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Sarah needed her to be competent and clear-thinking, not paralyzed by fear. As James completed the rappel setup, Maya studied the cliff face below them through binoculars. She could see the rope disappearing over a small overhang about 80 feet down, then reappearing briefly before vanishing again. The ledge system where Sarah might have landed was partially obscured by the angle of the rock face. "I should go first," James said, testing the rappel system one final time. "I have more rescue experience, and if the situation down there is bad, you'll need someone to guide you through the recovery." But Maya was already clipping into the rappel system. "She's my partner," she said quietly. "I'm going first." James started to protest, but something in Maya's expression stopped him. He had seen that look before in climbers who had moved beyond fear into pure determination. Instead, he double-checked her rappel setup and gave her detailed instructions for the descent. "Remember, we don't know what condition she's in or what the landing zone looks like," he said. "If you get down there and the situation is beyond what you can handle alone, don't be a hero. Secure her as best you can and call for me." Maya nodded, though they both knew that calling for help would be difficult on the remote mountain. Their emergency beacon could signal for rescue, but it would be hours before any help could arrive, and helicopter rescue at this altitude was not always possible. Taking a deep breath, Maya began her rappel into the unknown. The first 50 feet went smoothly, with good rock quality and clear sightlines. But as she approached the overhang where the rope disappeared, the complexity of the cliff face became apparent. The rope had cut deep gouges in the rock edge where Sarah's fall had dragged it across the stone. Maya could see that the line was severely abraded in spots. It might not hold for much longer. She needed to reach Sarah quickly and establish a new anchor system. As she rappelled past the overhang, the view below opened up dramatically. The ledge system was larger than it had appeared from above, but it was also more complex. Instead of a single flat area, it was a series of small terraces connected by steep rock steps. The rope disappeared around a corner about 30 feet to her left. Maya pendulumed across the cliff face, using her feet against the rock to swing toward where the rope led. The movement was technically complex, requiring her to manage her rappel device while simultaneously navigating across the steep terrain. When she rounded the corner, she found Sarah. Her climbing partner was lying on a narrow ledge barely 6 feet wide and perhaps 12 feet long. The massive rock that had broken away lay in pieces around her, some chunks still teetering on the edge of the ledge. Sarah was conscious but clearly in serious trouble. "Maya?" Sarah's voice was weak, barely audible over the wind that had picked up since the morning calm. "I can't feel my legs." Maya's heart sank as she quickly rappelled the final distance to the ledge. Sarah was lying on her back. Her climbing helmet cracked but still in place. Her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, and her face was pale with shock and pain. "Don't try to move," Maya said, landing on the ledge and immediately beginning to assess Sarah's condition. Her first aid training kicked in automatically. Check for consciousness, breathing, bleeding, then worry about spinal injuries and broken bones. Sarah was conscious and breathing, but Maya could see blood seeping through her jacket in several places where falling rocks had struck her. More concerning was Sarah's report that she couldn't feel her legs. Maya knew that spinal injuries were among the most serious complications possible in a climbing accident. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with pain and fear. Maya forced herself to project calm confidence even as she struggled with her own terror at the situation. "You're hurt, but we're going to get you out of here," she said, beginning to set up an anchor system that would secure both of them to the ledge. The technical challenges were immense. The ledge was exposed to rockfall from above, unstable with loose stones, and barely large enough for both climbers. Maya needed to stabilize Sarah's injuries, establish communication with James above, and figure out how to evacuate an injured climber from a nearly inaccessible location. She started with the anchor system, placing multiple pieces of protection in the solid rock at the back of the ledge and connecting them with rope and webbing to create a bomber anchor that would hold both their weight. Once she was confident in the safety system, she turned her attention to Sarah's injuries. The broken arm was obvious and painful, but not life-threatening. More serious were the potential spinal injuries and the multiple lacerations where falling rocks had struck Sarah's body. Maya used supplies from her first aid kit to clean and bandage the visible wounds, working as gently as possible while Sarah gritted her teeth against the pain. "I need to check your back," Maya said, explaining what she was going to do before carefully examining Sarah for signs of spinal injury. Her partner's climbing jacket was torn and bloody, but Maya couldn't feel any obvious deformities in the spine itself. The most troubling symptom remained Sarah's inability to feel her legs. Maya performed basic neurological tests, pricking Sarah's feet and legs with a safety pin from her first aid kit. Sarah couldn't feel anything below her waist. "It could be swelling putting pressure on the spinal cord," Maya said, though she knew they were both thinking about more permanent possibilities. "We need to get you to a hospital as quickly as possible." But getting Sarah off the ledge was going to require resources they didn't have. Maya looked up at the cliff face above them, trying to figure out how to communicate with James. She could see the rope they had used for the rappel, but it was too damaged to climb back up safely. She fired off their emergency beacon, knowing that it would take hours for any rescue response to arrive. In the meantime, Sarah's condition could deteriorate rapidly. Maya needed to find a way to evacuate her partner using their own resources. "There's a traverse," Sarah said weakly, pointing to a series of ledges that led around the cliff face toward the east. "I studied the maps. If you can get me to the gully system over there, there might be a way down that doesn't require technical climbing." Maya followed Sarah's gaze and saw what her partner was referring to. About 200 feet away, barely visible around the corner of the cliff face, was a weakness in the rock structure that appeared to offer a more gradual descent route. But getting Sarah there would require moving her across exposed, dangerous terrain while she was seriously injured. "That's crazy," Maya said. "You can't move with a spinal injury. We need to wait for rescue." "Look at the weather," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength from desperation. Maya looked up and saw what her partner meant. Clouds were building around the higher peaks, the kind of fast-moving weather system that James had warned them about. If a storm hit while they were trapped on the exposed ledge, their situation would go from serious to fatal very quickly. "I can't carry you," Maya said bluntly. "I'm 98 pounds. You weigh 50% more than I do." "You don't have to carry me," Sarah said. "You just have to help me move. I can use my arms and shoulders. If you can support my lower body and help me navigate the traverse, we might be able to get to easier terrain before the storm hits." Maya studied the route Sarah was proposing. It would require crossing several sections of exposed rock, with drops of hundreds of feet below them. Any mistake could send them both tumbling into the void, but staying put meant waiting for rescue that might not arrive in time, if it arrived at all. She thought about all the climbs she and Sarah had done together, all the times they had trusted each other with their lives on difficult routes. Sarah had never led her astray before. "Okay," Maya said, "but we do this my way, slow and methodical, with backup safety systems for everything." Over the next hour, Maya improvised a rescue system using their climbing equipment. She created a harness system that would allow her to support Sarah's lower body, while her partner used her arms and upper body strength to move across the rock face. It was crude and dangerous, but it might work. As they prepared to begin the traverse, the first snowflakes began to fall. Maya looked up at the darkening sky and realized they were running out of time. Whatever they were going to do, they needed to do it now. "Are you ready?" Maya asked, double-checking their improvised safety systems one more time. Sarah nodded, her face set with the same determination Maya had seen so many times before when they faced difficult climbs together. "Let's get off this mountain." Maya helped Sarah into position at the edge of the ledge. their rope system connecting them in a configuration she had never used before, but which made sense from an engineering perspective. Sarah's weight would be partially supported by Maya, but the majority of the load would be carried by the rope running through anchor points Maya would place as they moved. The first move was the most terrifying. Maya had to lower Sarah over the edge of the ledge and swing her toward the traverse line, trusting their improvised system to hold both their weights. For a moment, both climbers hung in space above the 1,000-foot drop, connected only by equipment that was being used far outside its intended parameters. But the system held, and Maya was able to get Sarah positioned on the narrow ledge that began their traverse. From there, they began the slow, terrifying process of moving laterally across the cliff face toward the gully system that represented their only hope of escape. Sarah pulled herself along using only her arms and shoulders, her legs dragging behind her, as Maya managed the rope systems and placed protection to keep them both safe. It was exhausting work for both climbers, made more difficult by the increasing snowfall and dropping temperature. 50 feet into the traverse, Sarah's strength began to fail. Maya could see her partner struggling to maintain her grip on the small holds, her broken arm making every movement agonizing. But Sarah kept moving, driven by the same determination that had carried her through 2 previous attempts on Mount Precipice. 100 feet into the traverse, they encountered their first major obstacle. A section of the cliff face had no ledge system at all, just blank rock stretching for 20 feet between them and the continuation of their route. Maya studied the problem from an engineering perspective, working out load calculations and anchor placements in her head. "I'm going to have to pendulum you across," Maya explained. "It's going to hurt, and it's going to be scary, but it's the only way." Sarah nodded, trusting her partner's judgment completely. Maya set up a complex pulley system using their climbing hardware, creating a setup that would allow her to swing Sarah across the blank section like a pendulum. It was technically advanced work, the kind of thing she had only read about in rescue manuals. The pendulum swing worked, but the impact of Sarah hitting the rock face on the far side nearly knocked her unconscious. Maya saw her partner's eyes roll back for a moment before Sarah forced herself back to awareness through sheer willpower. "Still with me?" Maya called across the gap she would now have to cross herself. "Still here," Sarah replied weakly, but Maya could see her partner's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Maya made her own pendulum swing, a terrifying arc through space with the storm building around them. When she reached Sarah's position, she could see that her partner was approaching the limits of her endurance. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the gully system, but Sarah was running out of strength. "How much farther?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the wind that was now howling around the cliff face. Maya looked ahead at the route still to come and realized that they might not make it. The traverse was becoming more difficult, not easier, and Sarah's condition was getting worse with each move. But turning back was no longer an option. They had committed to a route that only led forward. "We're going to make it," Maya said, though she was no longer sure she believed it herself. "Just stay with me a little longer." As the storm intensified around them, Maya faced the most difficult decision of her life. Their original plan was clearly failing, but she couldn't abandon Sarah. She was the only thing standing between her best friend and a fatal fall from Mount Precipice. Looking ahead at the increasingly dangerous terrain they still needed to cross, Maya realized that saving Sarah was going to require her to find strength and courage she wasn't sure she possessed. But she had come too far to give up now. The storm hit Mount Precipice with the fury that had made the peak legendary among climbers. Within minutes, the gentle snowfall Maya had first noticed transformed into a blinding blizzard, with winds that threatened to tear them from the cliff face. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the temperature plummeted below freezing. Maya pressed herself against the rock face, shielding Sarah from the worst of the wind, while frantically trying to maintain their safety systems in conditions that were rapidly becoming impossible. Ice began forming on their ropes and equipment, making every movement treacherous. "We need to find shelter," Maya shouted over the howling wind, though she knew there was nowhere to go on the exposed cliff face. The traverse route they had been following was now completely obscured by the storm, and moving forward in these conditions would be suicide. Sarah's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The combination of her injuries, exhaustion, and exposure to the storm was taking a toll that Maya could see in her partner's increasingly pale face and weakening grip on the rock. Sarah's eyes were beginning to lose focus, and Maya recognized the signs of shock and hypothermia setting in. "Sarah, stay with me," Maya said, positioning herself to block as much wind as possible from her injured partner. "We're going to get through this." But even as she spoke the words, Maya wasn't sure how they would survive. They were trapped on a narrow ledge in the middle of a vertical cliff face, with a storm raging around them and no realistic prospect of rescue until the weather cleared. Their emergency beacon was active, but no helicopter could fly in these conditions. Maya's mind raced through their options. They couldn't continue the traverse in the storm, but they also couldn't stay where they were indefinitely. Sarah needed medical attention urgently, and both of them were burning through their body heat reserves rapidly in the freezing conditions. It was then that Maya remembered something from her engineering background: the principles of thermodynamics and heat conservation. If she couldn't get Sarah to shelter, she would have to create shelter where they were. Working by feel more than sight in the blinding snow, Maya began constructing an emergency bivouac, using their climbing equipment and the natural features of the cliff face. She used their ropes to create a framework, then stretched their emergency bivy sacks and Sarah's climbing jacket to form walls that would block the wind. The work was exhausting and technically complex, requiring Maya to anchor the improvised shelter to the rock face while maintaining their safety systems and caring for Sarah. Her small hands were soon numb with cold, making it difficult to manipulate the hardware, but she forced herself to continue. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked weakly, her voice barely audible even though Maya was only inches away. "Building us a cave," Maya replied, stretching the last section of fabric into place. The shelter wasn't much, barely large enough for both of them to huddle together, but it cut the wind dramatically and created a small pocket of relatively warm air. Maya helped Sarah into the shelter, carefully supporting her injured body, while maneuvering through the narrow opening. Once they were both inside, Maya sealed the entrance as much as possible, leaving only a small opening for ventilation to prevent carbon dioxide buildup. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Protected from the wind, their body heat began to warm the small space, and Maya could finally think clearly about their situation. Sarah was seriously injured and getting worse. But she was alive! The storm would eventually pass, and when it did, Maya would figure out how to get them both off the mountain. "You saved my life," Sarah said, her voice stronger now that they were out of the wind. Again. Maya checked Sarah's pulse and found it rapid but steady. Her partner's color was improving slightly in the warmer air of the shelter, though Maya could see that Sarah was still in considerable pain from her injuries. "We're not off this mountain yet," Maya replied, but she allowed herself a moment of hope. They had survived the initial crisis of Sarah's fall and the storm. Now, they needed to survive until rescue arrived, or until Maya could figure out another way to get them to safety. As the hours passed, Maya monitored Sarah's condition while maintaining their shelter against the ongoing storm. She used techniques from her wilderness first aid training to keep Sarah warm and as comfortable as possible, rotating Sarah's position periodically to prevent pressure sores and circulation problems. The storm raged through the afternoon and into the evening, but Maya's improvised shelter held. She had engineered it well, using the principles of load distribution and wind dynamics to create a structure that could withstand the mountain's fury. As night fell, Maya faced a new challenge. Sarah was drifting in and out of consciousness, and Maya knew that falling asleep herself could be fatal for both of them. Someone needed to stay awake to monitor Sarah's condition and maintain their shelter if the storm damaged it. Maya had been awake for nearly 24 hours, having risen before dawn for their summit attempt that now seemed like a lifetime ago. The combination of physical exhaustion, stress, and the effects of altitude were taking their toll, but she forced herself to stay alert. She talked to Sarah through the long night, sharing memories of their climbs together and making plans for future adventures. Sometimes Sarah responded clearly, and sometimes she seemed confused or disoriented, but Maya kept talking, using her voice as an anchor to keep both of them connected to the present. "Remember the first climb we did together?" Maya asked during one of Sarah's more lucid moments. "That easy route in El Dorado Canyon that you said would be good for beginners?" Sarah managed a weak laugh. "And you crushed it so badly that I knew you were going to be trouble." "Nobody climbs that smoothly on their second day outdoors." You were showing off, Maya replied, trying to impress the new girl with your fearless approach to overhanging routes. Worked, didn't it? Sarah said. We've been partners ever since. Maya smiled in the darkness of their shelter, grateful for any sign that Sarah's personality was still intact despite her injuries. As long as her partner could still make jokes, there was reason to hope. The storm finally began to clear just before dawn of their second day on the ledge. Maya could hear the wind dying down and see gray light beginning to filter through the small opening in their shelter. When she cautiously looked outside, she found that the cliff face was coated with ice, but the visibility was improving. Storm's passing, Maya told Sarah. How are you feeling? Sarah's condition had stabilized during the night, though Maya knew she was still in serious trouble. The potential spinal injury remained the most concerning factor, but Sarah had regained some sensation in her legs during the night, which Maya took as an encouraging sign. Like I got hit by a mountain, Sarah replied, but her voice was stronger than it had been the previous day. Maya began the process of dismantling their shelter and preparing to move. She knew that rescue teams would be mobilizing now that the storm had passed, but she also knew they couldn't wait indefinitely. Sarah needed medical attention, and their food and water supplies were limited. As she worked, Maya heard a sound that made her heart leap, the distant whir of helicopter rotors. Looking up, she could see a search and rescue helicopter circling the area where they had been climbing when Sarah fell. Their emergency beacon had worked. Maya activated a signal mirror from her emergency kit, flashing reflected sunlight toward the helicopter to indicate their position. It took several minutes of signaling before the aircraft turned toward their location, but eventually Maya could see it approaching their cliff face. The rescue that followed was technically complex and dangerous, requiring the helicopter crew to navigate the turbulent air currents around Mount Precipice, while lowering a rescue specialist to their tiny ledge. Maya had to help transfer Sarah into a rescue litter, while maintaining the safety systems that had kept them alive through the storm. As Sarah was finally lifted off the cliff face and toward safety, she grabbed Maya's hand one last time. Thank you, she said, her eyes bright with tears. I wouldn't have made it without you. Maya was evacuated in a second lift, leaving behind the improvised shelter that had saved their lives, and the mountain that had tested every skill she possessed. As the helicopter carried them toward the hospital in the valley below, Maya looked back at Mount Precipice and realized that she had discovered something important about herself on that cliff face. Physical size had nothing to do with real strength. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. And true friendship meant being willing to risk everything for someone you cared about. Sarah's injuries proved to be serious, but not permanently disabling. She had suffered a compression fracture in her lower spine that temporarily affected sensation in her legs, along with the broken arm and multiple lacerations from the rockfall. After months of physical therapy, she made a complete recovery and returned to climbing, though never again on Mount Precipice. Maya's actions on the mountain earned her recognition from the climbing community and search and rescue organizations. The improvised shelter techniques she had used were studied and incorporated into emergency survival training programs. But for Maya, the real reward was simpler. Her best friend was alive and climbing again. 6 months later, Maya and Sarah stood at the base of a different mountain, preparing for another climb together. Sarah studied the route map while Maya performed her familiar pre-climb gear check, the same ritual that had started their Mount Precipice adventure. You sure you're ready for this? Sarah asked, using their old pre-climb joke but with new meaning after everything they had been through. Maya shouldered her pack and looked up at the peak above them. It was smaller than Mount Precipice, technically easier, and the weather forecast was perfect. But Maya knew that every climb carried risks, and she was prepared to face whatever challenges the mountain might present. Ready, she said, and meant it in ways she never had before. As they began hiking up the trail, Maya reflected on the lessons Mount Precipice had taught her. She had learned that courage could be found in the most unlikely packages, that friendship could survive the ultimate test, and that sometimes the smallest person could make the biggest difference. The mountain had tried to claim Sarah's life and had nearly succeeded, but Maya's determination to save her friend had proved stronger than the mountain's fury. In the end, it wasn't the size of the climber that mattered, but the size of their heart and their willingness to never give up when someone they loved was counting on them. Maya Chen had always been the smallest person in any room she entered, but on the treacherous slopes of Mount Precipice, she had proved that she was also among the strongest, most courageous, and most loyal. Her tiny stature had hidden a mighty spirit that no mountain could defeat. As they climbed higher into the morning sunshine, Maya knew that she would carry the lessons of Mount Precipice with her for the rest of her life. She had discovered that true strength came not from physical size, but from the depth of one's commitment to the people who mattered most. And she had learned that sometimes, when everything seems impossible and the odds are stacked against you, the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to give up. Because in that refusal, in that stubborn determination to keep fighting against all odds, lies the kind of courage that can move mountains and save lives. The climbing community would always remember Maya Chen as the tiny woman who saved her partner's life on Mount Precipice. But Maya herself knew the real truth. She hadn't saved Sarah despite being small. She had saved her because being small had taught her to be resourceful, determined, and unwilling to accept defeat. In the end, that had made all the difference.